Hey, what's going on, everybody? It is Derek. We are here in week 10. Can you believe that we are almost done with our 12-week program here? And if you missed it last week, before we kind of get into things here, you should have taken at least one of the practice tests. And if you didn't get the practice tests, then you should get them because you want to be as prepared as you can be and a little extra for this test so that we go into it with the utmost confidence, knowing that we're only going to need to take it one time to pass and to come out on the other side. Okay? So if you didn't take one of those last week, then take one of them. Doesn't matter which one. There's two of them out there. But just to get an idea of where you are and maybe certain areas that you're struggling with, right? Maybe there's questions that relate to security that you seem to be scoring less on. Perhaps go and review the security section and read a little bit more documentation, do a few more of the labs, okay? So, anyways, this week we've got a review of the management and logging section, and then we're going to go into some cost management concepts in AWS in the cloud. And it's going to be relatively short, especially when compared to like our past sort of sections that like the compute and the database, things of that nature. So having said that, let's just get into it and we will see what happens. So management and logging is going to largely revolve around CloudWatch, which is again what is happening with our architecture, and CloudTrail, which is who did it. Okay. So CloudWatch is going to be what gives you a comprehensive view of what's going on with your applications and your infrastructure. You can use CloudWatch dashboards in the console for nice visual displays of metrics and alarms, so it's not just all kind of like log records that you're looking at and trying to decipher. Metrics are what let you monitor a specific elements of an application or resource. Alarms let you automatically implement actions based on thresholds configured against metrics, and they can use or you can utilize that with SNS to send notifications when some kind of alarm does occur. All right, and as a reminder, alarm states can be an OK alarm or insufficient data. And then insufficient data, usually you just see it if you just create an alarm and you start to sort of aggregate logs against it. Okay. So an event bridge is what connects to your applications to allow you to respond to events as they happen. All right, you have the CloudWatch agent that's going to work with EC2 instances for detailed metric data. Okay. So EventBridge used to be called actually CloudWatch Events. It's kind of weird actually because sometimes they'll say that in test itself. They'll say, "Oh, EventBridge formerly CloudWatch Events." So just know that. And then, of course, different services are going to have different metrics. So, for example, S3 and EC2 are going to have different metrics just because, one's for storage, one's for compute, right? You're doing different things. All right. So, CloudTrail, on the other hand, is designed to record and track all AWS API requests that are made. Okay, and these are not necessarily just requests that are programmatic. Of course, that can be the case, but they can also come from SDKs or even from the console or even from other AWS services. Okay? CloudTrail records various metadata about events such as the caller of the request's ID, the timestamp that it occurred, and the source IP address where it actually came from. Records are stored in log files, which are typically created about every 5 minutes and then stored in S3. And you can also send these to CloudWatch logs, like a log group, to utilize automated responses using something like EventBridge. Okay? CloudTrail is very helpful for finding the incident root cause, especially again, once you integrate with CloudWatch, you can see what happened and then you can actually see who did it. So it'll help you maybe refine your security permissions or your access control or something along those lines. Okay. And it's also helpful for security, compliance, and audit reasons, as you can detect irregular patterns or restricted API calls, and you can keep records of those so you can present them to your auditor to document what you're actually doing and how you're remaining compliant against the defining policies of your company. Okay? AWS Config is designed to record and capture resource changes in your environment. Okay? It has a resource history that can track all changes on a given resource. You, like with any other kind of notification and tracking and monitoring service, can enable notifications with SNS on any area resource changes. Right? It integrates pretty handily with CloudTrail to track the source of the changes that actually happened. And once again, it's very helpful with compliance specifically, as you can check the compliance of your resources against specific controls and policies, right? Resources old and new ones that get created. So whenever a question gets asked about compliance, I generally lean towards config, as that's, a big kind of purpose that it serves. All right, sorry, I'm just getting something off that's barking at me on my screen here. And then you can or you can use config to help you get an overlay of your network relationships by identifying what resource is connected with another. So again, for example, maybe you have like a network interface. You can see what instance it's attached to, what subnet it's in, what region it's in, so on and so forth. Right? You have AWS organizations, which allow you to centrally manage and categorize multiple AWS accounts that you own. It's very helpful for security and compliance in a larger multi-account environment. So if you've got, a large handful of accounts, definitely consider using organizations to help kind of tie everything together. The hierarchy of an organization includes the root account, organizational units. Those can be nested, right? So you can have OUs inside of other OUs. And then accounts, which are at the very kind of base level within organizational units, okay? OUs let you categorize your account into things like maybe HR, dev, sales, test and sandbox, whatever. Service control policies, SCPs, are something that's exclusive to organizations, and they allow you to set guardrails, basically saying what is possible to do in your organization on all accounts under where it is applied. And again, SCPs don't actually grant permissions, they just define what is possible to have granted to an account. Okay? SCPs are hierarchical, so try to avoid setting them on root because an SCP will be inherited by every subsequent level. Okay? And you can deploy an organization with either all features or just consolidated billing, which comes with a small subset of features. Most of the time, you're going to want to use all features. Okay? VPC flow logs let you see the IP traffic that's going in and out of your VPCs. Right? It's very helpful in resolving communication issues within your network. You can have this flow log data sent to CloudWatch to integrate it there, and perhaps again with EventBridge. Flow logs can be created for a network interface on an instance, a subnet, or a VPC. Okay, so that's kind of the three options or sources of flow logs rather that you can have. Okay. You've got AWS Systems Manager, which is designed to automate the configuration and ongoing management of systems at scale. Okay. It supports EC2 instances, edge devices, and on-premise servers. So even though it is a helpful service, it's really only kind of limited to those scenarios, or those resources rather. It provides you a customizable System Manager Explorer dashboard to visualize your data and work items across accounts and regions. And it does require an agent, which is just software, to be installed on an instance. It's called the SSM agent. Okay, so you would need that if you want to start using Systems Manager with some of your EC2 instances. Okay, all right, so cost management concepts. One of the big value adds of the cloud is that you can be very hands-on and very granular with how you're actually spending money. So let's kind of look at some of the concepts of spending money on the cloud, as opposed to like just having on-prem resources, okay, and how we're actually going to pay for things in the cloud, right? So you're generally going to pay for data transfer out, compute power used, and the storage and or database space that you provision and use, okay? So those are kind of the main categories of things you'll be billed for. The billing dashboard is a high level platform for finding information on the expenses that you're incurring in your accounts. Uh, Definitely note though that in order to access the billing console, you initially need to grant that access to IAM users by the root account. And that doesn't mean you have to go in and like specify what users you are going to grant access to. It's just like an on-off switch. And then you would specifically say maybe like a billing admin or whatever is only able to view this billing console. Okay. Cost Explorer is a more detailed service to see expenses, so you can again get more granular and more customized with what you're actually kind of looking at and analyzing. Budgets keep your costs in line and can trigger notifications to alert you when you are approaching at or surpassing your desired amount of money you want to spend on something. Tags are very critical to tracking and managing costs, as we'll see. Some regions cost more than others just due to availability and some other factors, kind of on AWS's end. And you can also earn credits on certain things to help cover costs. Or you can even, if it's kind of just you, you can become a part of, maybe the AWS Community Builders program, for example, if you like working with AWS. And they kind of just shower you with credits, right? I think I've gotten like almost $1,000 in credits so far, and it's only been a few months, so I'm just kind of going crazy. All right. So the total cost of ownership (TCO) is something that gets presented quite a bit by AWS because it's again one of the largest value adds of the cloud. And basically, what it does is it compares the cost of owning and maintaining your own on premise physical servers and data centers and the associated costs with that versus using AWS cloud based servers and then just adopting a pay as you go model. So you only kind of pay for what you're going to use. But if we look down here, you can see that with on-prem servers, you have quite a bit of expenses, right? It's not just the physical computer itself, right? That is a factor, the hardware cost, but you also have the software cost of things you're going to run on these servers potentially. You've got the software functionality, so you need to spend time and money figuring out how it works and optimizing it. If you start to grow, then you need to figure out how to scale your architecture, okay, your software architecture. How much time does it take to implement changes or even implement this at all? Right? Time is money in a business. You're going to have to spend time and money training users on how to use everything, support and maintenance, hiring people to deal with all that and fix stuff, and then, your data architecture as well. Spending time and resources to format your data so it can be used later. So, all these things are the cost, general costs of owning your own on prem servers. Whereas with AWS servers, you can largely abstract out a lot of this, not all of it, right? For example, you're still going to need user training your employees and your staff on how to use the cloud. There's going to be some time to implement, especially maybe you're migrating. But for example, you don't have hardware costs anymore. You don't really have support and maintenance to a large extent. Maybe you still have AWS support, but you definitely don't have maintenance because you're not maintaining any servers. So these are all things, as a business that you need to consider when you are looking at how to actually host your servers and run your applications. Okay. And that is where the TCO comes in. All right. So Cost Explorer, like I mentioned earlier, it allows you to have a much more granular, sort of fine detailed analysis of your costs within your accounts. A key use is to identify trends using customizable visual dashboards, and you can filter your dashboards based on region, tags, services, more. You can see over here we've got usage type, instance type, linked accounts, things of that nature. But as you can see, this is much more specific and user friendly than perhaps just like an Excel spreadsheet, for example, where you've got a column with like the service, the column with the cost, the column with the usage hours, whatever, and then trying to figure all that out. You could just see here from a more, again, user friendly perspective, what kind of money you're actually spending and where it's going. Right? So you can see this purple bar here is due to this particular instance, right? G3S X large. This one, this teal kind of box for an M5 large, so on and so forth. Because we're filtering on EC2 running hours, right? So we want to see the hours, and then we want to see how much cost we are incurring over those hours for the specific instance type, okay? So again, Cost Explorer is a very useful tool for not only for yourself understanding costs, but also relaying costs to other people and presenting, maybe to executives or your boss or whoever, presenting these costs so everyone can be on the same page. Okay, that's very important in an organization is to have everyone on the same page. All right, so we're at about 15. Let's take a quick 5-minute break, and it is definitely going to be quick because, like I mentioned, it's a relatively short section. But either way, we'll come back here in a few and we'll keep after it. All right. into it, see if we can maybe finish up here in this next 15-20 minute stretch. So, cost and usage reports. I kind of alluded to these a minute ago when I talked about Excel spreadsheets with just a ton of columns and information. Well, that's basically what cost and usage reports are. Okay, it's CSV files that contain the most comprehensive set of cost and usage data that's going to be available to you. And once you create them, they're going to be sent to an S3 bucket where it's automatically updated at least once a day until your charges are finalized, right? The charges that are going to reflect on this cost and usage report. And because, theoretically, an Excel sheet that you might look at these CSV files in are, theoretically, you could have a million records, a million rows in Excel. These can be pretty large, right? It could be thousands and thousands and thousands of rows if you got maybe a large architecture with multiple accounts. So you can utilize and analyze these reports using things like Athena, Redshift, or QuickSight to run queries over them and actually bring back meaningful insights as opposed to trying to kind of manually comb through everything. Okay. Budgets are, as the name would imply, what lets you track your AWS usage and costs. You can set customized budgets and then receive alerts if your budgets are approaching, met, or exceeded. Okay? You can create reports to share with non-technical resources. Not everybody's going to understand what EC2 instances are, but they need to know how much we're paying for them. Okay? You can enable automation by configuring responses based on events that happen within your budgets. You can currently do 3 types of responses with budgets. Okay, you can change IAM permissions, you can change organizations permissions, or you can stop EC2 and RDS instances, which may not be ideal to just stop your instances, but if you're tight on money and you can only spend so much, well, then that might be what it takes. A good budget item is going to consist of 3 components. Okay, what you want to track, the budget amount, and the scope of your budget, right? So what the budget is kind of sort of looking at, and the percentages around that value that you're measuring. Okay, so an example of a budget could be like a cost, a usage, or a reservation budget, right? So you can track the cost of something. You can track how much you're actually kind of using this, right? How active is it? Or you can track a reservation budget. So how many like instances, for example, do you have reserved? Or you could do something like, how many, like how close are you to your service limit maybe for a particular service or a resource? And you can track your budgets at monthly, quarterly, or yearly levels. Okay. So you can see here with this particular budget, we've got our 3 categories here. We've got some cost, some A usage, and some reservation budgets. Cost is obviously going to be the most common. But you could see here that, okay, we've got a monthly EC2 credit budget, right? Which went a little crazy on the credits. And we've got a demo credit budget. So we're able to, or looking to spend no more than 3,000. Right now we'd be at 2,300, but you can also see that it's nice that it'll forecast out for you based on kind of your usage patterns and how you're actually using the services that you're tracking. Okay. And then we've got a few other ones here, and then it'll kind of show you, where you're at versus your budget in terms of a percentage. And then you could download this maybe as a CSV if you wanted to go that route and send it out and share it with others. Okay, or just analyze it like we talked about earlier. All right, so tagging is very important. Tagging involves identifying your resources with key value pairs and is by far one of the best ways to manage costs. Okay, you, for example, can have tags like the Department of Accounting. Maybe you had a Department of, sales. Maybe you have a Department of Development, Department for DevOps, whatever. Maybe you could have a status of approved, an environment, right? You could maybe have a location tag. Okay, so you can specify just dozens of tags. There's going to be different tag limitations based on what service or resource you're actually tagging, but I mean, it's very rare that you run into a situation where you don't have or you need more tags than you're allowed to have. Okay, you can group your tagged resources into resource groups, which will allow you to better organize them and apply permissions to groups of resources. So, kind of the same way that you would manage IAM groups by just applying permissions to the groups that will be inherited by everything in the group. Aside from tracking and managing costs, they are helpful for the following reasons. You can manage resources to see how much a certain resource has allocated. So maybe you can look at like your development or your test tagged resources in that environment and see how much money you're actually spending on these resources if you've got unexpected costs. You can use tags with automation. Okay, you can automatically apply tags to new resources you create so you can better track them once they're up and running. You can use tags for governance and compliance. If you needed to have specific, tags referencing specific resources in a certain way, you could do that. That's kind of subjective based on the company requirement there. And then it will also help you classify data and realize the subsequent security impacts. So you could maybe tag like an S3 bucket that has like customer sensitive data, like something like maybe credit card information or healthcare records, things of that nature. Okay, you can classify those buckets that have that sensitive information with tags. Okay, so the AWS pricing calculator is a free tool that can be used to estimate the cost of various AWS services. All right. And it contains over 100 of the most commonly used and popular services that you can throw into your estimate and build out. And we talked about TCO earlier, right? The total cost of ownership earlier. Uh, this pricing calculator can be used to kind of compare and contrast your TCO versus your cloud costs. Okay. So it's a really helpful thing when you're looking at maybe moving some aspects of your business's infrastructure to the cloud. You could see if it would even be worth it, right? You can put apples to apples with this amount of storage space with these particular services. This is what we need, and then you could see, what it would cost in the cloud, and then I mean, I guess it's kind of up to your own company to figure out your TCO, which you can do to, an extent. The appropriate people should be able to tell you what you're spending on like a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis or whatever. And then you could compare that with your pricing calculator estimate to see what it would cost versus being in the cloud. Okay. All right. So AWS Consolidated Billing is a feature in organizations that allows you to pay for multiple AWS accounts with one bill. If you've got a lot of accounts, this is very helpful to just pay up front so you don't have any like delinquent payments or anything like that. And you can also, with this master account that pays for all the other member accounts, you can use something like Cost Explorer to visualize usage for the consolidated billing that you enable. So, in other words, you could see how each account is spending, right? So, if we look over here, we've got the paying account, which we designated to be the master account. Okay. You've got 5 other accounts here that are linked to it. But your monthly bill is going to include this paying account's costs, right? It's still an AWS account, so it potentially could still incur costs. But you can also see how much each different account is spending. So maybe this AWS account 5 is your production sort of environment account, so it's going to be spending the most. But maybe AWS account 3 is like a testing environment, and you look one month and you're like, okay, why do we spend $119? Normally it's no more than 100, right? We can go figure that out. But again, instead of having to deal with paying for 6 different accounts here, you can just have this one paying account, just pay for everyone because you're going to pay anyways, and then you could just kind of figure out where these costs are coming from later. Okay? So, Since we're on the topic of cost, there are a few free services that are actually free. And then there's like a free tier that when you first sign up for AWS, there's a few resources that allow you to use them for free for your first 12 months of creating your account or until you reach a specified monthly limit. So for example, EC2 and RDS are in that free tier. Uh, but these services below are free forever as opposed to the free tier, which is free up to a point. It's important to note, though, that some services are going to generate paid services. Like, for example, if you've got a Beanstalk application running on Beanstalk, obviously this is going to provision like some compute resources, maybe something else that's required for your web app to run. Those are going to cost money. Auto scaling, of course, if you add more instances, you're going to pay for those instances. But setting up like auto scaling rules is in and of itself free. And then you've got the other ones here that are free as well. So it's important to know sometimes they will ask you something along those lines in terms of which of these services is free to use. So take that into consideration, but just know that even though they're free, they may generate some resources that are not free. Okay. All right. So that's going to be a wrap on cost kind of best practices in the cloud. We actually only went through 10 slides, so there's not really a need for a giant summary here. But definitely do the kind of sort of labs that are recommended this week that we're going to go through. Things like Cost Explorer, the pricing calculator, looking at the TCO tool as well. So this is the end of week 10, and we only have actually 2 more weeks of lectures. One of those is really just going to kind of be some review to get you ready for the test since it's coming up here soon, hopefully. But hopefully by now, you're feeling good. You're feeling confident for the most part. But just understand that you're not going to know everything, okay? And that's totally fine. Again, we just need to pass this exam. We don't want to get 100%, right? But if we aim to get like a 90% and we end up with like a 75 or 80, that's still a passing score, right? You need 700 out of 1,000 points to pass. And that's the goal, is to pass. Okay, and at that point, it's up to you to use these certifications to help yourself stand out and go into the workforce, prove your value, prove that you belong, and you know what you're doing. Okay, so hopefully this is helpful. We'll see you here next week for week 11. Be sure to do the labs and wish you the best. We'll see you next time.